My name is Clara, and I am 28 years old. When my parents invited me to a lavish dinner to hand me the $30,000 catering bill for my brother's wedding, they expected me to quietly pay it to keep the peace. What they had no idea about was that I was sitting at that exact same table, holding a manila folder containing the legal foreclosure paperwork to their primary residence. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where ordinary people face impossible family moments and walk out with their dignity intact. If you have ever been the one expected to pay, to fix, and to stay quiet in your own family, this story is for you. Please take a moment to drop a comment. Tell me where you are watching from and what time it is there, and be sure to subscribe. I love reading those. Let me take you back to the beginning, because to understand what happened at that restaurant, you have to understand the math in our family. Growing up in our house, love was a budget, and my older brother Leo was the line item that always got funded first. My parents, Diane and Wesley, lived in a comfortable split level in Connecticut, the kind of town where everyone knows your mailbox, but not your middle name. Leo was the bright one, the confident one. He was the kind of boy who got voted into every leadership position and acted surprised. My father introduced him at neighborhood cookouts the same way every time. This is Leo. He's going to be an entrepreneur. He said it like it had already happened. I was the quiet one. I was the one who did the dishes without being asked, scored perfect on my math tests, and never got a party for either. I don't say this with bitterness. I say it because it establishes the baseline of how I was valued. When I was small, my birthday was one candle, not as a tradition, but a single candle pressed into a grocery store cupcake my mother bought on the way home and never bothered to refrigerate. Meanwhile, Leo got rented bounce houses and caterers. I learned the arithmetic early. A child who asks for less is cheaper than a child who asks for the same. By the time I was 9, I had stopped asking for cake because I could see it made the arithmetic easier for everyone at the table. I became the family fixer. If a bill was short, I used my server tips to cover it. I learned somewhere around age 15 that the fastest way to keep the peace in my family was to make sure nobody had to ask twice. Ask once, Clara pays, everyone is happy, dinner is quiet. I trained them. I taught my parents that my wallet was a vending machine. Insert guilt, receive check. But I also had my own dreams. I wanted to go to a proper university and study finance. Knowing my parents wouldn't pay for it, I started a landscaping business when I was a sophomore in high school. I mowed lawns, weeded, and planted garden beds for 6 neighbors at $40 each. I spent my summers hauling root systems out of truck beds. I worked retail shifts until I smelled like fryer oil, taking the bus home in the dark. Every single penny went into a high-yield savings account that my parents had to co-sign when I was a minor. It was my college fund. By the summer I turned 18, I had painstakingly saved $30,000. That summer, Leo decided he was going to launch a tech startup. He had no business plan, no market study, just an idea he thought was brilliant. He needed capital. 2 weeks before I was supposed to leave for college, I went to the bank to withdraw my first tuition installment. The teller looked at her screen, looked at me, and said, "Sweetheart, there's only $400 in this account." I drove home. I didn't speed. My hands were at 10 and 2. I walked into the kitchen where my mother was organizing the spice rack, and my father was reading the paper. I asked where my money was. My father didn't even look up. He said, "Leo's company is taking off. He needed the bridge capital. We'll reinvest the profits into your schooling later." My mother turned around, wiped her hands on a dish towel, and delivered the line she always used when she needed my money. "Family takes care of family, Clara. It's time we remembered that." I stood in that kitchen, 18 years old, realizing that to them, I wasn't a daughter who had worked herself to the bone in the dirt for 4 years. I was just an asset that they had liquidated to fund their golden child. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. Crying would have meant I was surprised. And I wasn't surprised. I was just finally done pretending. I told them I needed them to sign a document. If it was an investment, they needed to guarantee it. I typed up a formal, legally binding promissory note for $30,000, plus a standard 5% annual accrued interest. I added a specific clause. The debt was secured by a lien against the equity in their primary residence. It had a maturity date of exactly 10 years. My father laughed. He signed it without reading the fine print, assuming I was just an emotional teenager playing lawyer who would never actually enforce a legal document against her own parents. My mother signed it, rolling her eyes. I took that piece of paper, placed it in a clear sheet protector, and put it in a navy blue 3-ring binder that I kept in the bottom drawer of my desk. Leo's startup failed 6 months later. The money was gone. I paid my own way through the state school, working nights at a pharmacy counter and waiting tables on weekends. Nobody handed me a thing. Over the next 10 years, I became a financial analyst. I built my way up to becoming a regional operations director. I bought a small paid-off condo and drove a reliable 9-year-old Honda. I made $72,000 a year, which isn't rich, but it was enough to know that nobody could ever take the ground out from under my feet again. And for 10 years, my parents never mentioned the money. They never paid back a single dime. Every time they asked me to co-sign a truck loan or cover a utility bill, I quietly said no. And because the vending machine finally said out of order, they didn't troubleshoot it. They unplugged it and walked away. We barely spoke. Fast forward a decade. I was 28. Leo was getting married to a woman who liked expensive things, and my parents were determined to throw him a 200-guest country club wedding. One Tuesday, my phone lit up with my mother's name. I hadn't heard her voice in months. When I answered, she sounded warm, careful, and almost rehearsed. "Honey," she said, and she only called me honey when she wanted something. "We'd like to take you out to dinner. Just the family. It's time we started healing. I have a rule I live by. When my mother is sweet, someone at the table is about to lose something. I just needed to make sure this time it wouldn't be me." I checked my calendar. It was mid-August. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out the navy blue binder. I flipped to the first tab, the promissory note. I looked at the date they had signed it. The 10-year maturity term had officially matured that exact week. The debt was legally callable. I didn't call my parents back to ask questions. I didn't warn them. Instead, I made a few quiet calls of my own. I went to the county clerk's office. I had a lawyer draft the formal notice of default and intent to foreclose, backed by the original, notarized lien against their property. I calculated the 10 years of accrued interest. I took all the paperwork, placed it in a thin manila folder, plain and unremarkable, and I put it in my purse. The dinner was at a restaurant called the Belvedere. It sat at the end of a landscaped strip mall, the kind of place with heavy glass doors and brass handles that whisper, "Entrees start at $42 before you even see a menu." When I walked in, the hostess led me to a private dining alcove in the back. My mother had told me it would be just the 4 of us. But when I turned the corner, I found a table with 16 chairs. My aunt, my uncle, my cousins, Leo, his fiancée. They were all there. The table was covered in platters. Lobster tails fanned across crushed ice, Wagyu sliders on a tiered stand, and in the center, a bottle of Bordeaux I recognized from vendor tastings that retailed for around $400. They had already started pouring before I pulled into the parking lot. My mother stood up with her arms open, beaming. "Surprise! The whole family together, just like old times." My father was at the head of the table, carving a Wagyu slider like it was Thanksgiving turkey. I sat down. I ordered a sparkling water. I smiled, because that's what years of front-of-house restaurant training gives you. The ability to smile while your brain is running a threat assessment at full speed. The small cut started around the second bottle of wine. My aunt leaned across the table and laughed. "Must be nice running all those fancy financials while the rest of us clip coupons." Leo smirked and said, "Diana always loved her spreadsheets more than her family." Every comment landed with the precision of something rehearsed. They had built this entire evening on the assumption that I would receive my fate, not audit it. When dessert arrived, the trap finally sprang. My father set down his fork. He folded his hands on the edge of the table, a gesture I'd seen him make before signing contracts and delivering Thanksgiving speeches. He looked at me, not unkindly, but with the expression of a man who believes he is being reasonable. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a piece of paper. He slid it across the white tablecloth until it touched my plate. I looked down. It was a catering invoice from the country club. The total was exactly $30,000. Leo's wedding is coming up, my father said, smiling. We've had a rough patch financially, but you've done so well for yourself. You're paying for this, right? You owe us that much. 5 words. You owe us that much. 16 people heard him. The young waiter refilling water behind me heard him. My mother nodded. My aunt reached for a pat of butter like the matter was settled. I looked at my father across a table covered in the wreckage of a meal I hadn't ordered, surrounded by a family I hadn't been told was coming, holding a glass of water I'd poured myself. I didn't answer right away. I've learned that silence does more work than words in a room full of people who are used to being agreed with. For 10 years, they had assumed my silence meant compliance. They assumed the cost of saying no was a room full of staring, expecting faces, and that I would fold to avoid making a scene. They thought the person who controls the check controls the room. I set my water glass down. I didn't raise my voice. I kept it at the volume of a normal conversation. I don't owe you, I said softly. I never did. My father's smile held for one more second, a reflex, like a light that stays on after you flip the switch. Then it went out. Clara, please, my mother started, the maternal mask slipping into something sharp. After everything we paid for, after everything we gave you a roof, an education. You didn't give me an education, Mom. I paid for it myself, after you drained my account, I said. I reached into my bag. I pulled out my manila folder. I didn't make a show of it. There was no flourish, no slam document, no speech. I simply turned the folder so it faced my father, and I laid 3 pages out on the white cloth, side by side, the way I'd lay exhibits in front of a client. Dad, I said, do you remember the paper you signed 10 years ago so you could take my $30,000? My father looked at the documents. The color left his face from the top down, like a window shade being drawn. The first page was the original notarized promissory note, bearing his signature. The second was the recorded property lien against their house, stamped and indexed by the county clerk. The third was the formal notice of default and intent to foreclose. I watched him read it. I watched him reach the word foreclosure and the maturity date. That loan matured on Tuesday, I explained, my voice steady, analytical. With 10 years of 5% compound interest, the balance is now $48,866. Because you have missed the balloon payment, the lien is active. Your home equity is legally frozen. You can't take out a second mortgage. You cannot borrow against the house. If the balance isn't paid in 30 days, I am foreclosing on the property. The table went so quiet you could hear the ice melting in the water glasses. Leo stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood. You can't do this. I have a wedding to pay for. You're destroying this family over money. I looked up at my brother. I'm not destroying the family, Leo. I'm just calling in a debt. A legal debt. You spent my college fund on a startup that failed. Now you can pay for your own wedding. My mother started crying. Not the quiet kind, the performative kind, the kind with gasps and dabbing and enough volume to recruit sympathy from adjacent tables. After everything I've done, she sobbed, you humiliate your family in public. I stayed in my seat. I didn't stand to match her. I didn't raise my voice to meet hers. I let her run out of words the way a storm runs out of rain. Every person in that restaurant was watching a calm young woman seated quietly, and a furious older woman shouting about money. You always told me that family takes care of family, I said to my mother. So why was I the only one who ever did? My father finally spoke. His voice was low, controlled, shaking at the edges. Clara, please. We're drowning. The business is in trouble. We were going to use the house equity to pay for the wedding and keep us afloat. I looked at the man who had stolen my future to fund my brother's, who was sitting across a table covered in expensive food he couldn't afford, begging me to save him from his own choices. If you need help, real help, I will sit down with you and a financial counselor, and we will figure out a plan, I said. No tricks, no audience, no lobster. but I am not paying this catering bill, and I'm collecting on my lien. I stood up. I picked up my purse. I left a $100 bill on the table for the waiter, Nathan, because he had earned it handling my family. I turned around and walked out through the heavy glass doors. I walked into the warm night air. The cicadas were starting up in the landscaped trees. I got into my reliable 9-year-old Honda, started the engine, and drove home in a silence that was finally, gloriously mine. The fallout was absolute. Because my legal lien froze their home equity, the bank denied my father's line of credit. They couldn't pull the cash. Leo's lavish country club wedding was entirely canceled. They ended up getting married at a local park, and Leo didn't speak to my parents for 6 months because they couldn't fund his lifestyle anymore. My parents had to drain their remaining retirement accounts just to pay me the $48,866 they owed me, saving their house from foreclosure by the skin of their teeth. My mother posted a long, dramatic status on Facebook about ungrateful children and modern families who don't understand loyalty. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I had my money back, with interest. I learned something vital that night. The strongest position in any room isn't the one holding the biggest number, or the one screaming the loudest. It's the one that simply holds the undeniable truth on paper. Records do not negotiate. They do not argue. They do not forgive or condemn. They just tell the truth. If someone in your life only values you when you are useful, take this as your sign to stop auditioning for a seat you already deserve. You do not have to buy your way into the hearts of the people who are supposed to love you. Setting boundaries isn't revenge. It is survival. It is choosing yourself when no one else will. If my story touched you in any way, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to set boundaries with your own family? Share your experience in the comments. I read every single one. Until next time, remember, your worth is not a line item on a spreadsheet, and you deserve to be chosen first. See you in the next one.